Hello, my name is Miranda and welcome to my presentation on Venezuela. During this presentation, I'm going to go through an intro of Venezuela and its history, and then cover the government, economy, crime, and humanitarian issues, and then finish with the conclusion. The country of Venezuela is located in South America, bordering the Caribbean Sea and the North Atlantic Ocean between Colombia and Guyana. It has an overall tropical climate and has an average elevation of 450 meters. Venezuela has everything from the Andes Mountains in the northwest to the Central Plains in the southeast. Its largest natural resources include petroleum, natural gas, iron, and gold. Venezuela has a population of 31.7 million people, and the most common ethnic groups are Spanish, Italian, and Portuguese. The official language is Spanish, and most people, about 96%, are Roman Catholic. In the early 20th century, Venezuela was led by military strongmen. In 1959, Venezuela had its first democratically elected leader. In recent years, it has been going through financial and humanitarian crises that have caused turmoil throughout the country. In this video, I'm going to give an overview of Venezuela to include its history and current events and the impact both have had on its current state. The country of Venezuela has had a history of Spanish colonization. It started in 1498 when Christopher Columbus discovered the land and then Spain moved in to colonize it. Spain ruled over the land and imposed Spanish-based laws without regard to the indigenous people. The main driver of the Venezuelan economy at the time was agriculture, primarily tobacco, wheat, and leather. Despite agriculture being the prime moneymaker for Venezuela, Spain was more interested in the precious metals it could acquire in other regions. It wasn't until cocoa became popular that Spaniards became more involved in Venezuela and began to migrate there to run cocoa plantations. This created a need for labor and increased the number of African slaves bought and sold in the region. The first revolution against Spain oppression took place in 1749. Although it was unsuccessful, it showed Spain just how much Venezuelans were growing and how unified they were as a people. This resulted in the first grants of military political authority through a seat of the Capitanecy General of Venezuela. This was a big step towards Venezuelan recognition as a political entity. On July 5, 1810, Venezuela declared its independence from Spain, while Spain was preoccupied with the invasion of Napoleon. This was the first time in years that Venezuela was free from direct foreign intervention. The United States has been involved with Venezuela since 1835, and the relationship between the two countries has changed drastically over the years. As the U.S. increased in its own economic and political power, it began to spread influence of democratic ideals across the globe, including Venezuela. Due to the high amount of oil in Venezuela, the U.S. was very interested in maintaining strong trade and diplomatic relations with the country. This need for oil also made Venezuela a higher target for U.S. influence and possible interference in its domestic policy and political leadership. After Hugo Chavez took power in 1999, relations began to go downhill between the United States and Venezuela. In 2002, there was a coup attempt that briefly removed President Chavez from office. Chavez blamed the U.S. and the CIA for the attempt, and this worsened relations between the two countries. After President Obama took office, he attempted to establish diplomatic talks with Venezuela, which were ultimately unsuccessful. This later led to sanctions against Venezuela, hindering its trading capabilities. Currently, Mr. Trump is involved in some Venezuelan politics, as he voiced public support for Mr. Guyana, who, on grounds of rigged elections, has claimed President Maduro as illegitimate and claimed that he is president. Venezuela is considered a federal presidential republic with its capital in Caracas. It has a history of multiple constitutions. The current one was adopted on the 15th of December, 1999. Venezuela offers universal suffrage for citizens over the age of 18 and recognizes citizens by birth and descent. The Venezuelan government is broken up into the judicial, executive, and legislative branches. The judicial system is a civil law system based off the Spanish Civil Code, and the highest court is the Supreme Tribunal of Justice. The three branches are assigned with different roles and checks and balances for one another. In recent years, however, these checks have often gone ignored or unfulfilled, as the executive branch, which includes the president, has gained increasingly large amounts of power. The current president of Venezuela is Mr. Nicolas Maduro, who was elected by a very small margin. His re-election in May 2018 was highly controversial and one that many opposing parties boycotted. Many candidates were kept from running and others had been jailed. After he was elected, the United States supported Juan Guaido, who claimed he was the legitimate president of Venezuela. This has caused excessive amounts of turmoil as the country is split between support of the two presidents. Despite civil disagreements, much of the military still supports Maduro, which has allowed him to maintain power. The conflict between the two presidents has worsened the already dire economic situation. Many of the issues Venezuela faces have arisen from the corruption of the current political regime. Earlier this year, for example, Mr. Maduro blocked foreign aid and closed the border of Brazil. This was done to strengthen his own political position at the expense of his people, who relied on that aid. The economy of Venezuela is still very highly dependent on oil as a source of revenue. Oil accounts for almost all of Venezuelans' export earnings and nearly half of government revenue. Falling oil prices since 2014 have severely impacted Venezuelans' economy and led to a severe economic crisis. Since 2017, oil production has decreased, and the GDP contracted 12% in 2017. Inflation increased 2,000%. Due to this hyperinflation, the price of goods had doubled roughly every 19 days. Resource scarcity has also been a huge issue, and even those who can afford the increased prices struggle to find food and resources. President Maduro's response has been to increase state control and blame the private sectors for the shortages. He's placed the responsibility on local Socialist Party members and maintained strict currency control. Due to price and currency controls, local industries are struggling to produce goods and sell them for a profit. According to the CIA World Factbook, these expansionary monetary policies and currency controls have also created opportunities for corruption and have fueled a rapid increase in black market activity. The crime situation in Venezuela is also dire. Venezuela has been ranked one of the deadliest and most violent countries in the world, according to the Venezuelan 2019 Crime and Safety Report. In previous years, the violence had been primarily contained, but has since spread throughout the country. The government often attempts to refute claims of high crime and murder rates and refuses to release official crime statistics to avoid admitting fault or claiming responsibility. Because of this, police are often understaffed and underfunded, which lowers the odds that any crimes will be handled appropriately. One example of this is in the automotive sector. Despite having similar laws as the United States, there is very little enforcement, and traffic laws are often broken. When people inevitably get into accidents, the police shortage means authorities often take hours to arrive. This long amount of time decreases the chances of people reporting incidences or solving them through legal means. Based off estimations by the U.S. and independent observers, there is a violent death rate of 81.4 for every 1,000 residents, which is high compared to world averages. Venezuelans' high crime and violence rate are attributed mostly to mobile street gangs and organized crime groups. These groups commit violent crimes such as homicide, armed robbery, and kidnapping. They are also involved in the drug selling and trafficking, which has made Venezuela the largest drug transit country in Latin America. According to Insight Crime, Venezuela is often used as a key transit country for drug shipments to the United States and Europe from Colombia. This brings in a flood of illegal narcotics and creates safety issues for all countries involved. According to OSAC, the main reason so many people turn to crime is because of the poor socio-political conditions within Venezuela. With the economic downturn, people are often not able to achieve financial security and resort to crime as a means of survival. Due to the high crime rate, the number of tourists visiting Venezuela has decreased significantly, and the chances for success in building up the industry is limited by the unsafe conditions. Although there doesn't appear to be credible information to indicate that U.S. citizens are targeted specifically, tourists in general are targeted for their wealth. It can be especially dangerous around airports, where there have been many murder and robbery reports around the terminals. Taxi drivers have been known to rob and kidnap people around airports, and traffickers use airports to smuggle illegal drugs out of the country. The U.S. Department of Transportation even went as far as to suspend all direct flights between the U.S. and Venezuela due to this danger. Domestic violence has also been an issue. Venezuela has always faced a struggle with women's rights. However, recently, there has been a drastic increase in the amount of violence against women and the lack of representation for them in the judicial system. The government has even gone as far as to ignore the issues and downplay them by decreasing visibility and public records. This keeps President Maduro from being pushed to adjust these laws and leaves women with little they can use as ammunition against the corruption of these policies. More than 3 million women have fled Venezuela in recent years, 1 million of which went across the border to nearby cities in Colombia. Due to struggles finding work and being able to support their families, women often resort to selling their bodies through prostitution. They also sell their bodies in the literal sense by selling hair and breast milk in order to survive. Due to a lack of health care and the high infant and birth mortality rates, women are more likely to voluntarily become sterilized in order to take control of their bodies. Access to and education of birth control is also a huge issue, as hepatitis B is incredibly common among women in Venezuela. Overall, women's rights continue to be a major problem and will likely continue to be so for many years to come. During Chávez's presidency, poverty was reduced from 50% in 1999 to 27% in 2011. It also increased school enrollment, access to water and sanitation, and decreased infant and child mortality rates. According to the CIA World Factbook, the government sponsors missions dedicated to education, nutrition, healthcare, and sanitation funded through petroleum revenue. This could potentially create a problem, however, as it is based entirely upon the oil industry. Infant and maternal mortality rates are a very good indicator of the effectiveness of a country's healthcare system, along with its economic and political stability. In Venezuela, maternal mortality rates are 125 deaths per 100,000 live births. This rate places Venezuela as number 63 when compared to other countries globally. The current infant mortality rate in Venezuela is 11.9 deaths per 1,000 live births and creates the ranking of 117. Healthcare is not something that is accessible for all and is often a contributor to the migration of Venezuelan citizens. The risk of contracting a major infectious disease is high, and preventable but life-threatening diseases such as malaria are still incredibly common. Healthcare expenditure for Venezuela is 3.2% of the annual GDP. The average citizen completes 14 years of school, and the Venezuelan government invests 6.9% of annual GDP into the education sector. As of 2016, over 97% of the country is literate, with similar rates for males and females. After completing school, there is a 14.6% unemployment rate for youth ages 15 through 24, which is higher than U.S. rate of 8.6, but still average and compared to global rates. A big issue for Venezuela has been the brain drain the last few years, as more educated and skilled members of society leave. More than 1 million middle and upper-class Venezuelans have emigrated due to the repressive political system and the lack of opportunity. With the economic crisis and violence, an estimated 4.3 million Venezuelans have also fled and become refugees or migrant workers. This puts a strain on the economic system and makes the education sector less effective at providing skilled labor to the Venezuelan economy. Venezuela has had a complex history and faces an uncertain future. Venezuela is currently going through a state of political and economic turmoil, which has had damaging effects to its economy, politics, and humanitarian policy. Previous colonialization has some effects to this day and can be contributed somewhat to the problem. Single commodity-based economic structures are common of previously colonialized countries. In Venezuela's case, this single export is oil, and it was the dependency on oil that has led Venezuela to its current economic crisis, when prices and production decreased. However, the largest factor in understanding Venezuela's current status is the corruption within the government that continues to this day. Political corruption has led to the tightening of state control and increased executive power in the wake of the economic downturn. As a result of this corruption, humanitarian issues have gotten worse or stagnated. Issues such as women's rights, ineffective healthcare, and high crime rates have led millions of people to leave Venezuela. Changes in policy and economic strategy are needed in order for Venezuela to succeed economically in the future and be able to provide proper care and opportunities for its citizens.